Welcome to our series called Everybody Brings Something to the Table, because there's nobody who doesn't eat. And today is part of a new series of talks called The Secrets of Supper. And we want to talk about how food is actually important in ways we may not realize. And today I want to talk about the Feng Shui of food. I'm sure many of you have heard that term, Feng Shui, which means wind and water, and it's about where you stand and where you put furniture and how everything is coherent in terms of the energy that's out there and you tapping into it. And we should be tapping into it with the way we eat and what we eat. And so that's why I call it the Feng Shui of food. And Mother Nature has done her very best, if you think about it, to table train all of us. She's been trying to teach us the wisdom, what you've heard called maybe by Buddhists, being in the moment when we eat, because Mother Nature brings forth just the right food, just when our bodies need it the most. She doesn't care about the calorie count or the nutrition percentages, the diet gurus, or the federal government's pyramid. What she cares about is the calendar. She doesn't give us summer fruits in February, right? You live in Maine, you get that. We import them from Chile, where they have summer, or Guatemala, where it's always warm. To what matters to Mother Nature most when we eat or when we're planning our dinner is GPS, our global positioning system, meaning where you are right now on the planet. That should determine what you eat. The food that fuels our body has to sync to the time of day and the place on Earth if you want to have clean, efficient energy and not what is called dis-ease. So if you put that hyphen in dis-ease, you will see the origin of the word. That means something has gone wrong. So think of it this way. Eating is an act of fueling the body just the way you gas up your car. And for the best performance, every time you fill her up, you want fuel that gives you clean energy, not those knocks and jolts you get from bad fuel in your car. This isn't really rocket science. It's just keeping our body acclimated to its immediate surroundings, so there is no dis-ease in your body in the surrounding. When we let our body friend its surroundings, as they would say now, by eating local seasonal food, we are fueling it to blend with the air we are breathing, the water we are drinking, the soil we are walking on, and the bacteria in that soil. We are accepting it all, becoming part of it all, and there's no dam, deluge, no deficit, no disease. So Feng Shui, which is the ancient Chinese science of positioning, which means wind and water, and the motion of wind and water, two elements, controls, the Chinese will tell you, all the energy flowing around the earth, including what creates the climate and the resulting food supply, which controls the qi, or our energy. And Feng Shui is supposed to create a friction-free intersection of the physical with the invisible all around us, breaking barriers to harmonious energy flowing freely. The mantra of Feng Shui is location, location, location. You hear that from the realtor all the time. And it is typically applied to design, as how you best arrange your furniture or where you face your front door. But it also applies to our kitchen and our eating habits, because food is the energy exchange, if you think about this, from the outer world into our inner body. That's the exchange. Eating is the intersection of these two worlds, placing us with the outer world and the outer world within us. So tabletop feng shui is when we reflexively counter the summer's heat. Remember, we just had summer by eating lots of cold food, right? Don't you feel like you want lots of cold food? And we react to the chill of winter by turning on the stove to make slow cooked, rich and fatty stews, which you really don't feel like eating when it's 94 degrees in July. It's when we instinctively, did you ever do this on a hot summer day? Reach for potato chips or peanuts or olives or saltwater crustaceans like lobster and other very salty foods that you just feel that moment you have to eat. That's because our bodies are sweating out their water and we need something to hold that water inside. And so we intuitively reach for salty foods because we know that's what salt does. So if you are eating potato chips and peanuts and olives and saltwater fish, you are right on schedule in July and August, noshing on those chips at your picnic. Mother Nature is forever cluing us this way. Right now, when the sunlight is getting shorter, we are starting to get winter squash that come from the farm. Now think about that. They've been out there soaking up the sun for a long time. They aren't fast. And they will release that in our bodies slowly over a longer time, which is heating our metabolism, which is what we need to have in the winter, not necessarily the watery tomato that is going to help us when we sweat. So in the springtime, when sunlight lengthens and the air gets warm, what does Mother Nature send us? Asparagus, dandelion greens, fiddleheads, green garlic, mushrooms, nettles, and pea shoots, ramps, rhubarb, scallions. These are the first responders to the reboot of solar power. And they transfer that solar power, that go-go energy, that propelled them to burst through thawing ground. And this helps us to spring out of the cold, dark lethargy of winter. In other words, we inherit their exertion. They're very special. And that is the word spring, spring up, like all those vegetables do out of the cold ground. They will help us if we eat them then. They may not do so much for us in November, but they will do a lot in April and May. And that's why we talk about spring tonic, foods that will fill our body with sunshine, and their force is with us, you might say. And it's not science, it's science. It really isn't poetry. And the reason is that green color in most of those foods I described comes from chlorophyll, which is a medicinal marvel, a molecule that soaks up and stores and then releases solar energy. And so to put their sunshine in your body, you can saute dandelion greens or nettles or pea shoots in olive oil with green garlic or scallions or steamed fiddleheads, and you are transferring through that chlorophyll solar energy. Anybody have any questions? Makes sense. So when we get too much sunshine, and the summer heats up and we start to bake and broil in those 90-degree days, our body, we sweat, and that dries our insides out. But Mother Nature comes to the rescue with very watery foods. What do we get in the summer? Think about that. There you go. Berries, melons, cucumbers, tomatoes, very watery foods that are meant to rehydrate us as we sweat. Our bodies are 90% water, and we have to keep them that way. So we gorge on these watery delights the entire summer season, and we will accompany them with salty foods to keep that water in our body. You may not be so excited to eat watery foods in February when you're freezing. You may want something that will warm you up. But that cornucopia of watery foods isn't really all. Our sun-roasted joints and muscles don't need water to restore themselves. They need a lube job. And this is just what when Mother Nature increases enrollment in her schools of noticeably oily fish. Did you ever realize that the oiliest fish come in the summertime? Salmon and bass and bluefish and mackerel and sardines. They are hauling them out of our water in the summertime, just in time. Aren't these the fish? And have you noticed perhaps that sometimes on a hot August night, you'd rather have an oily fish than a huge piece of roast beef? It's lighter, you tell yourself. It just feels better to eat it. And that's the feng shui of being right where you are in the moment. And what's more, almost every country on the sun-baked Mediterranean beats the searing heat of their summer with the tasty repertoire of lube job food that the Turk people will call zetinagli and the Greeks will call olive oil foods. You speak Turkish, you know? Olive oil foods. This means they are summer vegetables steeped in olive oil and served hot or cold to you as a side dish, an appetizer, a snack, even your entire dinner. The best known of all the olive oil dishes in the Mediterranean is probably Imam Bayaldi, the eggplant dish famed for that name. The priest fainted, or the imam fainted, because it said he was overwhelmed by how costly all the olive oil must have been for his host. Stuffed grape leaves, tomates. In France, ratatouille, bean plaqué, and that oily salad of green beans with tomatoes and dill known as fasolakia, stuffed green peppers, even hummus. And of course, that true Greek salad of watery tomatoes and cucumbers, salty feta and salty olives bathed in olive oil. All of these foods are deliberately intended for summer eating and may not appeal to you on a snowy night in January. They're too light, they're too oily, and now you want something more hearty. But in the summer, that's why they are perfect. Now, I will say in passing that one of the most popular recipes in a cookbook I wrote, Vegiana, the Dharma of Cooking, was the first one, Armenian green beans, which is an olive oil dish. And it got these huge raves on Amazon. And you just braise fresh green beans in a whole lot of olive oil with onions and dill. And there are Greek and Turkish versions, and we're going to give you the recipe to take home and have a go at it. Or next summer, you can eat them at room temperature or straight out of the pot, but they are an example of a summer olive oil dish because you'll be pouring olive oil in that pot and wondering why you're doing that. Now, the chill of winter where we're headed right now requires food that will warm your heart as well as your stomach. And yearning for heavy meats and their fat. Why? Because that fat will heat the body as it metabolizes slowly over and over. We keep the fire going to slow cook in the winter, right? We braise, we roast, we slow cook a lot. We absorb the earth's minerals that were stored in all those root vegetables. Remember, the root vegetables tend to come at us in the fall. The carrots, the potatoes, the onions, the turnips, the kohlrabis, they come later in the season because they have been slowly absorbing the minerals in the ground. And they will now release them in our body when there aren't that many around in other food. And we can help others in the winter to keep their body heat. Remember that internal heat that we have now with heat pumps and gas stoves is only about 150 years old. Before that, you were on your own to freeze. So people wanted to give people body heat. It was a gift. And it was the gift of Christmas time, the coldest time of the year. And then cookies and cakes are deliberately known with the spices that we know warm your stomach and your body. And what are they? You all know what your Christmas spices are. Cinnamon, garlic, cloves, and ginger. These will heat your body, and they are a gift to people you love before central heat. They were a gift to people you love to keep them warm on the coldest nights. And we also indulge in the winter in foods that have been fermented, because miraculously, fermenting adds vitamins those food didn't possess at the beginning. I'm talking about all those things you probably put up or are buying now: relishes, pickles, sauerkraut, aged cheeses, and the cacao bean, which has been turned into chocolate, which is the gift of choice that fires up the heart on the midwinter cold day, Valentine's Day. You are giving people chocolate to warm them up. And since I mentioned that holiday, let's look more closely at the calendar and the way we unconsciously eat according to the holidays we are using to mark changes in that calendar. I want to start by pointing out that most calendars, ours not among them, are ancient and were derived by watching the position of the moon and the temperature of the air. Our calendar is supposedly based on the sun, which, as you know, is not variable like the moon. And so it relies on 4 solstices to set the pace. Sun, moon, nobody knows where the year begins. For the Jewish calendar, it is the new moon after what should be the harvest, which is to say when everything is over and there is time now for reflection on what's ahead. And we just passed the Jewish New Year. This is usually on our calendar in September or October. Our new year, January 1, as I began to figure this out, is a bit off the celebration of that long-awaited solstice when light begins to return to us, which is what we now call Christmas, when we celebrate a birth. For us, it is the rebirth of light and warmth, and it became the birth of Jesus. In Asia, as you probably know, the Chinese New Year and Vietnamese Tet and Tibetan New Year are lunar, and they will occur at the second new moon after the winter solstice. This should signal for them the start of the planting season, or what we call spring, because that is when life springs back up. Persian New Year is actually on that spring solstice, March 21st, when day and night are equal, and spring is officially here. We use the lunar base Easter, which is the first Sunday after the full moon after the solstice. We say it is the resurrection or the return of life from the dead of winter, and that is the resurrection of Jesus from the tomb. And we have Passover at the same time, which is the resurrection of a people back into the sunshine of freedom from the darkness of slavery. And so everybody is marking this time with food. So what does that mean for our dinner? A lot of symbolic food is going down on tables at these times of the year. We dig out all of our superstitions about superfoods, don't we? To eat on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day to supersize our chances for the year ahead. There's more to good luck on your dinner table than a rabbit's foot or a 4-leaf clover. In Peru, for example, people think if you eat gold-colored food like papas a la huchinango, potatoes colored by turmeric, or a local saffron-like spice called todillo, it'll bring money to your pocket. People in the South here serve cornbread, golden cornbread, for the same reason. Lentils remind some people of coins, piles of them in one purse, like in one bowl on your table. And when cooked, they will swell. And so since Roman times, this has brought to mind growing wealth. And so in Italy and across the ocean, even in Brazil, eating lentils on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day is supposed to bring you good fortune in your purse in the months ahead. While a hearty bowl of lentil soup does qualify, Italy's most popular first dish of the year also includes for them another good luck in the New Year food, pork. A platter of cotticino al lenticchie will feature slices of boiled coccino, a special salami-like sausage, on top of warm, well-seasoned lentils. People in West Africa and the Caribbean and the American South call black-eyed peas lucky peas on New Year's because they seem to look like coins. The most famous and traditional way to serve them is slow cooked with ham hocks or salt pork, maybe you've done it, or rice into a dish known as hop and john. Southerners believe eating something humble like this as the first food of the new year, say at the stroke of midnight, rewards your lack of indulgence and arrogance with riches flowing to you in the months to come. The actual saying is, and I quote, "Eat poor that day, eat rich the rest of the year." Now you can believe that or not, but it's an old tradition in the American South. Rice for riches and peas for peace. That's what's in the hop and john. Whether served alone or in the hop and john, lucky peas are usually accompanied by 3 other so-called lucky New Year food: pork, collard greens, and again, cornbread, whose color symbolizes the wealth from gold. People associate progress with pigs because, get this, in contrast to, say, lobsters that we know can crawl backwards and chickens that can scratch behind them. Did you know that pigs only move ahead? They cannot move backwards.
Did not know that.
They put their snout to the ground and they dig forward without ever turning back. So some people, pork is believed to be the perfect food to propel you forward into the new year without looking back and having regret. Plus, the pig's fat symbols abundance. That's why the Italians serve the sausage with their lentils, and American Southerners put that ham hock in with their lucky peas. The traditional centerpiece of an Austrian New Year feast is the whole pig. And in England or Scandinavia, it's a whole ham. People also consider pork a lucky New Year food because if you have a pig to slaughter at the end of the year, you're guaranteed food for the rest of the year. Collards, cabbage, and kale, these are greens, and they are excellent promoters of good health. And also they happen to be the color of paper money. So the more greens you eat on New Year's Day, and the more greenbacks and good luck the year is going to bring you. So stock up now on your collards and kale. In the South, hop and john is traditionally served with the side of collards for that reason. You have the gold for the cornbread, you have lucky peas, and you have green for the greenbacks. In Germany and the Pennsylvania Dutch country, the new year is greeted with ham and pickled cabbage, sauerkraut, another word for that. Because if you accept sourness, it is supposed to encourage fate to balance it with sweetness in the year to come. Also, those long strands of sauerkraut symbolize long life. It helps that these greens happen to blend well with another food that will bring you prosperity, pork. So there it is again, everybody's eating pork on the new year. Fish are considered lucky in 3 ways. Their silvery scales shine like coins. They swim in groups whose abundance represents prosperity, and they only move forward. Fish cannot swim backward, which symbolizes progress. To ensure a good year from start to finish, the Chinese will deliberately serve their fish on their New Year's with the head and tail on it. In Germany, Poland, and Scandinavia, where herring is traditionally abundant, people eat it at the stroke of midnight to ensure a year of great bounty. And around the Mediterranean, people all eat salt cod dishes on New Year's Day. And you may remember from history, they got that salt cod from us here in Maine at the beginning of our country. In Spain and Portugal, and in some parts of Mexico, at the stroke of midnight on New Year's, everyone quickly eats 12 grapes, one representing each month of the year to come. So if perchance that 3rd grape you get in your mouth is sour, March is going to be a bitch for you. And if, say, the seventh grape is extra sweet and juicy, July's gonna be great. You will find lots of joys you weren't expecting. Anyone who swallows all 12 grapes before the clock stops chiming at midnight is supposed to have extraordinary good fortune in the year to come.
There you go.
Even bagels can symbolize a new year because the idea behind eating a ring-shaped baked good on New Year's morning is your way of acknowledging the year has come full circle. Time has no defined beginning or end. The calendar just keeps going around like that bagel where you cannot find a beginning. January 1 is also in Dutch Donut Day for the same reason, goes round and round. And the Greeks have a special lemon cake known as vasilopita with one coin baked inside, like the Epiphany cake in France. Whoever gets that coin gets the year of good luck. New Year's traditions in Japan require slurping up soba noodles, those extra long soba noodles that you have to swallow without breaking them to guarantee you're going to have a long life and get through that whole year. Tibetans serve those annoyingly endless vermicelli or glass noodles they call ping for the same reason. If you can slurp them up without breaking them, you have long life in the year ahead. Some people claim all round fruits are lucky to eat on New Year, but in Turkey, only the pomegranate symbolizes the possibility of good fortune because the pomegranate represents everything that everybody wants the new year to give them. For starters, the red color, being the same as the human heart, symbolizes life itself. Its medicinal and nutritional properties speak for good health. And of course, those abundant seeds we call arrows represent fertility and prosperity. So it's a very lucky food to eat on New Year's. Now on our calendar, in that dark winter valley between the solstices, December 21, March 21, when some of the winter is lightening up, which is to say, let's talk about the 14th of February, which we have now called Valentine's Day, for Saint Valentine. And we indulge in the foods of love to recharge our libido for the spring. Science says, actually, there are 5 reasons we think of food as aphrodisiac, and you think about whether or not you eat them on Valentine's Day. It creates warmth and moisture in the body, which makes us feel all snuggly and relaxed. It looks like a sexual organ, male or female, and that creates in the mind desire. They actually are reproductive organs or the produce of them, like eggs or pomegranates and figs, which are seed-filled sacs. The exotic is erotic to us. And lastly, they stimulate one or more of our basic senses, taste, smell, touch, and that awakens passion. In this particular category, we find sensual arousing characteristics for food. It's smooth, it's rich, it's creamy, it's exotic, it's spicy. Chief among the foods of love, as you know, is chocolate, which is everywhere for Valentine's Day. And why does that happen? Why does suddenly every chocolate shop is having a big deal and we're all out buying chocolate for February 14th? Science has discovered that chocolate contains tiny traces of tryptophan, a chemical that helps the brain produce serotonin, which is your feel-good hormone. It also has traces of an amphetamine-like chemical called, I can never pronounce it, phenylethylamine, one that the brain pumps when you fall in love. There is a chemical the brain pumps out when you fall in love, and eating chocolate can encourage production in your brain. Chocolate also contains theobromine, which is a mild caffeine-like chemical that dilates your capillaries, increases your energy, and stimulates your heart, and sort of getting you toward euphoria. Plus, it satisfies your sweet tooth. Mayans believed the trees that the cacao beans grew on were so divine that they named those trees cacao, which in Mayan means God's food. The Aztecs may have launched a connection between chocolate and sexual desire, for their divine emperor Montezuma supposedly consumed as many as 50 gold goblets of chocolate a day to enhance his sexual prowess. Discovering chocolate in the New World, Cortes conquistadores brought cacao as cocoa back to Europe in the name of love, and it created quite a stir. What is it? Wine is another traditional aphrodisiac we indulge in on Valentine's Day, maybe every day. It's known in Latin as vino, which comes from vinum, which comes from Venus, the goddess of love. Grapes, the source of wine, hanging in ripe and juicy clusters, were an ancient symbol of fertility in many of the world's early religions. And the followers understood that the benefits of fertility depended on a little touch of Venus, a stroke of love. So when grapes were squeezed and fermented into wine, they naturally represented the offspring of Venus and Eros, god of sexual attraction. And that made wine the ultimate love potion. Wine's alcohol content can release your inhibitions. And thanks to the grape skins left in that fermenting vat, red wines are full of a chemical called resveratrol, which is an antioxidant that seems to increase your blood flow and improve your circulation, activities that will set the body up for excitement. And of course, oysters, which we can eat in an R month like February, because oysters contain nutrients that support sexual health, including zinc, dopamine, and omega-3 fats. Zinc is important for male sexual fertility, and a 2009 study on rats found that it did raise testosterone. Oysters also contain dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter responsible for giving you feelings of pleasure and reward. So if your Valentine's Day dinner is oysters, wine, and chocolate, you've hit bingo. And finally, we get to spring, the renewal of life after the death of winter. And everybody's table, whether you realize it or not, represents that, starting with all those eggs, hard-boiled and dyed in cakes, decorating round cakes, egg breads like challah, bread and cakes made round to show the year goes round and life goes round without beginning or end. And of course, the lamb, the spring paschal lamb, symbol of new life, or perhaps the ham. Why? Because traditionally in the centuries before we had refrigerators, the family pig was slaughtered and salted in October, hung to cure, and now 6 months later in spring, it was ready to eat. And all you had to do was eat it before the summer heat spoiled it. So ham and lamb are your spring meals. And I'm sure you've all had eggs, ham and lamb at spring holidays and didn't know exactly how they got on your table. The Chinese New Year, or the Chinese table, will include lotus root, which is thought to be a restorative, and fish, again, which do not move backwards. Holi is the Hindu holiday on the new moon closest to spring equinox. And like the Hebrew Purim, for which there is a special pastry symbolizing the liberation and rebirth of a conquered people, it's a moment of unabashed merriment for Hindus. Holi means burning and celebrates the legend of a prince saved by godly devotion from a devilish king who wanted to burn him alive. On the eve of Holi, bonfires are therefore lit to destroy any lingering evil, along with all your dirty clothes and bedding from the year before. There's a lot of mayhem. Trust me, I've been there in India. If you've ever been there on Holi, you don't want to be. And there's this outburst of new energy, and thus Tandai, a fragrant, nutritious, but alcoholic fermented milk drink that is served to energize and cool the merrymaker's body and spirit. Tandai means in Hindu something that cools. And they throw red dye all over everything they can find. Red is the symbol of life, the heart, the rebirth. And they throw red dye all over you, whether you want it or not. And then, of course, we have another spring holiday, St. Patrick's Day, which is the Irish way to celebrate spring. Believe it or not, that's what it is. It celebrates the birth of a new Christian Ireland, rid of its dark pagan past. And nothing symbolizes rebirth better than springtime. And that's the reason for all the wearing of the green. The Irish shamrock was revered as the signal of liberation from winter's tight grip. It was the first thing to come out of the ground. And thanks to St. Patrick and his conversion efforts, those 3 leaves on a shamrock came to represent the Holy Christian Trinity that could liberate your soul from the darkness of paganism. But it isn't edible, the shamrock. So cabbage became the table centerpiece of the holiday. And not just because the cabbage is green. There's more to it. The cabbage is the first heads up of the growing season. Its groundbreaking was a sure sign. Good news, it's time to go out and plant your potatoes. The ground's ready, the cabbage is up. And so St. Patrick's Day gave people a break from the constraints of Lent. And they went at it joyfully, serving up bacon with the cabbage and pounds of fresh butter with soda bread and made merry with drink. And we are still doing that, having cabbage and pork and potatoes on St. Patrick's Day when everybody's wearing green. The Persian New Year on March 21st, which is the official spring solstice, is called Nowruz, and they eat sprouts, signs of new life, on the table, and they decorate it with different foods, 7 of them, each symbolizing something good to come in the year ahead. The table decoration is known as Hafsin, and its tradition goes back at least 1,000 years to Zoroastrianism. Hafsin means 7 S's, and people decorate their table with 7 different foods that just happen to start with the letter S, because the number 7 symbolizes the 7 days of creation in the Bible. And then there is sirka vinegar, which represents age and the patience that comes with it, although I'm not sure about that. Sieve is apples, and they are displayed for health and beauty. Sear, garlic for medicine. Samanu is a sweet yellowish brown pudding made with wheat germ and represents affluence. Sumac is that bright red berry that comes in spice form and symbolizes the color of sunrise. And finally, the last S, Senjed, is dried fruit from an oleaster tree, and it symbolizes love. And with calendar spring and thoughts of new life come weddings, many, many weddings. And all of them are giving you food to symbolize what's actually happening there. The joy of a marriage is celebrated everywhere with sweet-filled festivities that feature foods rich not only in ingredients and cost, but symbolism. Certain dishes are specifically served to emphasize both the sheer delight of this moment and the hope that fertility and prosperity come next to this couple. In Morocco, guests are greeted with a plate of dates that represent the sweet smoothness of life and a glass of milk that signifies the safety of family and the happiness that comes from being nourished. In the Philippines, at a wedding, guests are served suman, a very sticky rice cake wrapped in coconut leaves, and that signals the gluing and wrapping together of 2 lives. Long noodles called kuksu are served at Korean weddings to express hope the newlyweds will entwine in a long life. And dessert could be yakshik, sticky rice, sweetened with brown sugar, and doused with raisins, pine nuts, and chestnuts, which all represent fertility. Honey is a powerful marriage symbol everywhere in the world, the sure sign of momentary sweetness. While the officiating priest recites blessing mantras at a Hindu wedding, the bride's parents will welcome the groom by offering madhuparka, a yogurt mixed with honey. Honey makes accepting the marriage sweet and yogurt promises it will be strong in health. The common Moroccan wedding dessert, which is almond and honey bruats, which is phyllo, cornets of almond paste scented with orange flower water and drenched in honey, are meant to start the marriage sweetly, but also nobly, because almonds and orange flower water are expensive and they are the exalted foods of royalty. Sephardic Jewish weddings will serve soutlatch, which is a sweet rice pudding, and that's Turkish and Armenian, made from coconut milk, honey, and almonds to represent a sweet, prosperous life. Irish Catholics pour mead, particularly mead made using honey, because the ancient Celts equated honey with virility, and that's why historians believe this is the origin of our current word, honeymoon. Take a grain of salt. Because almond trees are the first to respond to the warmth of spring sun, sending out blossoms that burst even before the leaves appear, and almond trees or plum trees do the same thing. They represent the magical renewal of life. And in Greek mythology, they became the symbol of immortal, reblossoming love. So in Greece and Italy and all along the southern Mediterranean, you have to serve almonds at a marriage. They are sometimes offered at German weddings too, because they are associated with fertility. Now, most wedding almonds are those candy-coated Jordanian almonds. And this is in keeping with a tradition that supposedly originated in ancient Rome, where honey-covered almonds from trees native to the banks of the River Jordan were served at marriage festivities. In the 15th century, when sugar became common and everyone could afford it, the nuts were now coated instead in sugar dipped in pastel colors. And the bitter nuts with a bright sugar coating stand for the bitter sweetness of married life. Jewish wedding feasts typically start with breaking bread, and that bread has to be a challah, egg-rich loaf, eggs for fertility, made by braiding together strands of dough the way a marriage is now going to braid together families and individuals. Parents of the newlyweds will recite the standard blessing for bread, and then the bridal couple will break that bread and feed each other with a piece, and then share the rest with all their guests. This indicates they will now be sharing their newly braided lives, and everyone is bound together by a piece of bread. And of course, we watch the bride and groom at every wedding shove cake into each other's mouth. They will nourish each other in sweetness. The wedding cake that we all recognize is less than 100 years old, the result of refrigeration and electric mixers, but it still has traditional symbolism. That white icing represents the bride's purity, and those decorative fresh flowers symbolize springtime, the season for new life. And those multiple layers, and usually there are 3, stand for 2 large families, 2 families, and that small one on top is the new family. Saving that little top layer, as most weddings do, to celebrate the new family's first anniversary, or hopefully first child's christening, started in medieval England. Guests would bring something sweet to the newlyweds, and as those cakes piled up, the couple would reserve the top one for themselves to sweeten their next milestone. Of course, in those days, the only sweet that was going to last a year or more without your freezer was that dense fruit cake. So the rum and brandy soaked confection became the wedding cake you had to have. The nuts and the honey dried fruits and the marzipan and the batter all symbolized fertility and prosperity. And some brides even took to counting the raisins in their piece to foretell how many children they would have.
No.
Let me tell you that wedding fruitcake is still so traditional in England. You may remember that Prince William and Catherine had one encased in sugary white icing. to make it look more modern. What's often called that Mexican wedding cake cookie or a Greek wedding cookie and an Italian wedding cookie are the same shortbread ball made from almonds, brandy, and confectioner's sugar. They are round for life without end, buttery rich for prosperity, and often scented with clove for that touch of bitterness that will strike a couple. And then they are rolled in powdered sugar to symbolize extra sweetness. The prolific watery and salty foods of summer I talked about earlier, and the olive oil foods can bring us into where we are now, season of the harvest, and everywhere we will find harvest celebratory meals, not the least of which is coming to our tables next month. Our Thanksgiving actually started out as an October harvest feast, which is why every American table, if you think about it, features the harvest foods of New England: cranberries, winter squash, potatoes, apples, pumpkins, and the successor of the wild turkey. Sukkoth, which is from the Hebrew for booths or huts, arose from the Exodus Bible dictate to celebrate the late summer's fruit harvest. And eventually it became mandatory, a pilgrimage festival, set days when people had to give their first fruits to the temple in Jerusalem to be offered. Jews used Sukkoth to commemorate the 40 years the children of Israel wandered in the desert, living in those temporary shelters, harvesting whatever they could find. And so for this holiday, a field hut or garden shelter of some sort is still constructed of recently gathered stalks, stems, branches, vines, leaves, dried fruits, and flowers. Why do I want to tell you this? Because the Plymouth Pilgrims wanted a sacred way to express their thanks for the harvest that meant their survival. And they saw in the Bible this Exodus exhortation to build this harvest hut. And so today, you and I are decorating with corn stalks and pumpkins and dried flowers. And that's where it comes from when you are decorating your house for Halloween and Thanksgiving. Samhain, which means the end of summer in Irish, is celebrated in Ireland on the 31st of October, halfway between the autumn equinox, September 21, and the winter solstice, December 21. And it signals the finality of the harvest season and onset of the darker half of the year. This moment when plant life dies was believed to be the moment the veils between our world and the other world were thinnest. And so the spirits of the dead might easily mingle with the living ones once again. If this is starting to sound familiar, you know where I'm going. To celebrate Samhain, the Druids built huge sacred bonfires in which people brought their harvested food and the animals they would sacrifice. They came also with newly harvested pumpkins they hollowed out as lanterns, and they dressed in animal costumes to ward off the evil spirits, and they were ready for a huge communal feast that celebrated the endless circle of life. Loved ones who had recently died and those born during the past year were celebrated. And then everyone carried home some of that fire in their pumpkin to kindle their hearth for the winter. Do you recognize any of this? Christians eventually adopted this Day of the Dead into what they call All Hallows Eve. And now we are putting lanterns in pumpkins for Halloween. The Aboriginal Americans called the gloriously bright and round full moon we just had after the autumn equinox the harvest moon, because it signaled to them the moment to gather together the magnificent gifts the Great Spirit had given: corn, berries, beans, grains, nuts, fish, and small game. Because they had taken these gifts, the Native Americans wanted to give back to the great God. And so they used this time to offer ritual prayers and thanks to every living thing that had sacrificed its existence to become their food and clothing that allowed them to survive another year. And they celebrated their good fortune with dance, drumming, games, and feasting. And afterwards, they would begin what was the big game hunt, leading in the Midwest and Northeast to what we call the Feast of the Hunter's Moon. This celebration included prayers of thanks where they offered meat food to the Great Spirit to request their survival over the long winter to come. And in that long winter, you and I are cranking up the heat of the stove and the oven, and we are making braises and stews and roasts of large animals like they would find on the hunt. Beef and venison and whole pork. We feast on the winter squashes and root vegetables that spent all summer slowly soaking in the solar and mineral energy and will now slowly release it into our bodies to keep our metabolism heated up. It's like your own heat pump. To celebrate the 8 days of Hanukkah that memorialize the miracle of a small cruet of oil, keeping the temple lamps alit for 8 days, that it took the Hebrews to fend off their captures. Jews will eat every December foods fried in oil, and chief among them is the potato pancake or the Eastern European latke. Why? Because the Eastern European potato crop was harvested just around Hanukkah time, and probably because traditional Hanukkah food had to be meatless. Cheese is also served to commemorate how bite by bite, the temptereth Judith fed the Assyrian general Hophernes so much cheese, he became thirsty for wine. And when he was finally drunk enough, she cut off his head, freeing the Hebrews from their worst enemy at that time. Yomari are delicate molasses-filled dumplings eaten in Nepal during the coldest month of a Himalayan winter, particularly on the full moon day, which just happens to be a special holiday called Yomari Day. The word Yomari combines 2 words in the language of Kathmandu's native people. Yo, to like, and mare, which means a special delicacy. Yomari are believed to heat the body as they metabolize, and so they are a gift to your loved ones to fight winter's cold. Their fragrant sweetness is meant to counter the harsh bitterness of the winter coming, and their shape symbolizes the Hindu goddess Saraswati, the light of wisdom, in this moment of great darkness. Rice flour yomari are so soft and delicate, they have to have a doughy tail to be picked up. And the Newari people believe the longer you can make that tail, the shorter your winter is going to be. And now we fill our sweet treats and hot drinks with those spices that warm the body in the winter: ginger, cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. And for dessert, we will have a cake that just looks like that fireplace log, a bûche de Noël, as the French call the iced jelly roll. It commemorates the ancient Northern European tradition of celebrating the winter solstice by burning the largest available log in the fireplace, the Yule log, to create enough heat for you to cook a feast and warm everyone in the room. When the large houses gave way to small apartments without fireplaces, that Yule log morphed into this sweet dessert that symbolizes light at the moment of most darkness, heat in the time of great cold, and comfort at such a bitter moment. And in the grab and go this month, Hannah gave out a recipe with Ethiopian hot spices and chicken, which is meant to kind of get you a little bit warm and spicy in the autumn, not yet too heavy. And there are spices in there that will heat you and spices that will excite you. And to show you how to kind of be in the feng shui of the moment. And Gail has some recipes, and I will just tell you from my own experience. I just made a huge batch of bone marrow soup, because the Chinese will tell you, if you've had anything happen to a bone, you should eat bone marrow and encourage your body to produce more of it. And so I'm eating bone marrow after my hip replacement, and that's my feng shui of the moment. So I turn over to Gail and her handouts. And then any questions you have, I'll answer.
I'm hungry.
Yes.
I tried the recipe the other day and it was awesome.
Oh, excellent.
Louder.
Oh,
I tried the recipe the other day and it was awesome.
great.
Very good.
There will be another spice kit coming out a week from today, next Friday. So when you come back for part 2, you can pick up another spice kit. It is for Moroccan spiced lentil soup. Sandy, is it Moroccan lentil soup?
What's that?
The recipe you gave me for lentil soup is Moroccan, Turkish lentil soup.
Well, I just want to thank you for the class, and I traveled a bit and I ate a lot of different foods, but you brought home the point that it has so much symbolism, which, you know, when you go to Morocco, well, you eat shish kebab and different seasons. I ate the 12 grapes in Spain, but I didn't realize the numbers and all that. So I really want to thank you. I really learned a lot from this. It was a pleasure.
Well,
Before
you know,
you
these are
leave.
things we do unconsciously, so it's nice
Yeah,
to just
that's
bring
what
them
I'm
forward.
trying to say.
Give us a little boost.
Yeah.
Perhaps Sandy, you would talk about the next.
Yeah,
next
but you want to give
week's.
the handouts? Or
Well,
you
I'll
gonna
do
keep it to
handouts, but
yourself?
if you tell people, so they'll come back.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
This is only the beginning.
So next week we'll be back. And there'll be the Turkish red lentil soup. There are many red lentil soups in the Mideast. It's a very popular thing and Turkish is my ultimate favorite and everybody's, it's very simple and it's got spices from that area. Next week, we're going to talk about your dinner table is actually your medicine cabinet. For 5,000 years, people have used what we call food as medicine and Big Pharma is basically building on that. And many of our original medicines came from them watching what the ancients ate. And the best example I could give you is garlic. For 5,000 years, people would call garlic the killer of demons. That is because people who were choking like I am right now, really coughing, would be moving around like this. And they would feed them raw garlic and they would stop. And so they called it the killer of demons. And everybody knew if you had somebody coughing and choking or spitting up from the lungs, you fed them garlic. And modern science has discovered, and you may remember the very original antibiotic drugs were sulfa drugs. That terrible smelling garlic that you smell, and the reason it stays on your breath if you eat garlic, and they used to call that Italian birth control. Garlic, is because garlic is made up of sulfur. Or sulfa, and that it, when you eat garlic, it's the only food that does not go into your digestive tract. For reasons that nobody understands, it goes right into your lungs. And there it becomes a sulfa drug. And it wipes all the viruses out of your lungs. Or it did for 4,000 years. Now you can go into the health food store and buy garlic pills if you want, but the original sulfa drugs were made by examining garlic pretty close up. For 5,000 years, people have used yogurt to cure diarrhea. And it's still a viable cure. So we're gonna look at all these ordinary foods you eat and how your dinner is a medicine cabinet, in case you didn't know that. So any other,
One of my,
yes,
I have migraines or had migraines on a regular basis. And one of the things one of my doctors said to do was eat dark chocolate. It contained magnesium. We tried to find, I can't take a supplement for other reasons, but we tried to find foods that would build up my magnesium.
yeah.
Dark chocolate, cashews, and leafy green vegetables.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I just have to say heads off to my mother. Like, you know, when you're a child, you don't think about these things unconsciously. You eat the good food. We were never sick. She always served fresh, seasonal food. The herring that you mentioned for New Year's, there wasn't a New Year's in our house. There wasn't herring salad. You know, it was chopped up with onions and red beets and all of that. And I'm just so excited to hear you speak in this class because now my conscience is expanded, so. Yeah, and like I said, hats off to my mother. She knew all this stuff.
Well, most of this knowledge was passed down from mother to grandmother to daughter and onward. And because women were in the kitchen and they had this knowledge, which is why they ended up being called witches, and you always see witches brewing in a big pot, particularly Macbeth, they're always brewing something. And it comes because women figured all this out over millenniums, and that's where they became witches, and they're always brewing.
And it's so sad, our newer generation, you know, you go in a grocery store and you see young mothers with all that prepackaged food.
Yeah.
That's all being lost, you know, the home cooking and the fresh food, seasonal buying and buying locals. It's an art that's getting lost, isn't it? A lot of it. What a shame.
I will tell you that personally, I have not, because I had surgery, been to the farmer's market in a month, and I'm crushed because I always feel that's what I owe my health to. I go and I buy what's there at the moment and I eat it, and it's Maine. It's got the Maine soil, it's got the Maine air, it's got all of it, and it keeps me balanced. And I haven't been able to go. About that a lot.
But I would say there's a resurgence.
The real feng
You
shui
see-
is
You see young people at those markets now.
keeping yourself.
Yeah, there's a generation coming
It's
up.
like-
Yeah, I'm glad.
I was telling my doctor that one of the things of real feng shui I learned with this cough I developed is somebody said, "Are you eating honey?" And I said, "Yes, I have this great Greek honey. I love Atiki honey." No, you have to eat Maine honey. And I said, "Really?" And I studied all this for years, and they said, "Yes, because it contains the pollen that you're fighting against. And therefore you have to eat the local honey."
Huh.
And that was a whole new thing for me, and I wanted to put it in this talk and forgot, but yeah, I now have 2 jars of Maine honey on the shelf. Because it contains, it's made, the bees make it from the whatever pollen that has been disturbing everybody this fall is in that honey, and therefore it's a homeopathic
Absolutely.
cure, whereas the Greek honey isn't going to do that for you unless you're in Greece having an allergy.
But the other point is when I was growing up, the foods that we are criticizing weren't available. So it
Right.
wasn't all often because our mothers were martyrs, that stuff wasn't available. Whether they would have bought it, probably, it's pretty enticing. I guess there's a new thing now, there, baby food is in these pouches. I was reading this article about, you know, people are just buying these pouches and they're easy, they just give them to the kid and the kid sucks it out of the whatever and they eat it for 2 years, and of course they're not getting solid food, so their development is.
We were paying a very
Changing.
heavy price for having
Yes.
everything all year round.
Right.
And I have a talk about that later, but how we went from this to, I want to have raspberries and tomatoes in Maine in February. And big agribiz is only too happy to go to our fantasies and what physical diseases and ecological devastation it costs. And I'm not preaching one way or the other. I'm just bringing the facts forward that this idea of not obeying the feng shui. And what value is a tomato that's hothouse grown in Mexico and gassed on the way up here? What is it doing for you? That's what people are still trying to reckon with, I think.
Yeah.
Do you have
It's a
anything-
real shock to go from having one of those tomatoes to having a real summer. You think it's a completely different food.
How hard is it to boil a potato and a carrot, squish it up and feed it to your babies? You know, you don't need the jar and the $1.50 expense and yeah. Well, it's nice to bring more awareness to the younger generation. And like you mentioned, you know, there's the old school and now there is quite a few younger people that you see at the farmer's market again. And we
I
have
have to say, my mom
in the late fifties was a big fan of prepared food. And I did not know that a broccoli looked like it did until I was in college because I thought it was a square food. It came out of the freezer. So,
Wow.
One of the horrifying things about some new food products, thinking particularly of the baby food in those pouches, they're all packaged in plastic. And that plastic sheds into the food.
Yeah. Of course, then we can go into feminism and, you know, the mother used to stay at home and had time to prepare breakfast, lunch and dinner. Now every woman goes off to work, you know, and fast food is pizza. What did they say? Our mothers used to have one kitchen knife and there was turkey and vegetables and potatoes and dessert on the table. And today, you know, you have the Vitamix and all the machines, and then you get hot pizza for dinner. So life changes.
The origin of dis-ease,
Disease.
when your body's out of sync with where it is. and
Yeah.
What, yeah.
We do the best we can. Everybody do the best they can. Nice to be aware.
They sort of carry this topic into next week about your kitchen tables and medicine cabinet. And all that history has shown us, and think about how many times you've had ginger ale when you were nauseous. Particularly in the old days in the hospital, if you had surgery with that original ether anesthesia, they would wake you up with ginger ale.
Yeah.
Yeah. As the cure-all.
Mhm.
And people still eat ginger if they get, right, Scar, if you're seasick or air sick.
Mhm.
And these are basic foods that people have
And
used for a
vertigo.
long time as medicine. And you can just walk into CVS there and you'll go down the aisle and it will say acai pills, garlic pills, beetroot pills, this pill, carrot pills, this pill. It's all been big pharma into pills instead of just eat the real thing. Hannah, do you have anything to?
I do not. Thank you all for coming and I hope
Thank
you'll
you.
join us
Thank you.
next week for part 2.
Thank you.
Alrighty.
Thank you all.